The night I found my husband's private journal hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace was the night everything I had been trying to explain to myself finally had a name. Vincent was not losing his mind on his own. Someone was helping him lose it. And the worst part, the person I suspected had been sitting across from me at dinner 3 nights a week, filling my wine glass and calling me sister. I stood in the cold living room holding that small leather notebook. The fire had been dead for hours. My hands would not stop shaking. Vincent was asleep down the hall. His breathing had been shallow for weeks, unsteady, the kind of shallow that makes you count without meaning to. The doctors kept adjusting his protocol, kept saying this was simply how the disease moved, faster in some patients than in others. But the words inside that notebook said something else entirely. I read the same sentence 3 times before I let myself believe it. R is adding something to my morning tea. My hands shake worse after, asked Kessler. R was Rowena, Vincent's younger sister, and Kessler was his attorney of 27 years. I pressed the notebook against my chest and stood in the dark for a long moment. The house was enormous and old and full of the kind of quiet that has weight to it. I thought to myself, you are 62 years old, Lois. You have spent 40 years teaching other people's children how to think clearly and speak honestly. You are not the kind of woman who ignores a sentence like that. So I didn't. Let me take you back to how I got here. My name is Lois Garner. I was born and raised in Lincoln, Nebraska, the second of 4 children, and I taught 7th grade English for 38 years at the same middle school, where I myself had once sat in the back row and read novels under my desk. I know every student by name. I brought cookies on the last day of school every single year. I raised my son Travis mostly on my own after my husband passed when Travis was 11 years old. We were not rich, but we were steady, and steady, I have come to believe, is worth more than people give it credit for. Travis is 31. He has his father's blue eyes and my stubborn streak, which I have always considered a gift rather than a flaw. 2 years ago, he was driving home from a night shift at the warehouse where he worked when a driver who had fallen asleep at the wheel crossed the center lane and hit him head-on. Travis survived, which the trauma surgeons called remarkable, but the damage to his spine was severe. 3 vertebrae, the kind of injury that leaves a young man in a wheelchair for the rest of his life if the right surgery doesn't happen in time. The surgery cost $340,000. Travis had no insurance. I had retirement savings that covered a fraction of it. I sold the house I had lived in for 26 years and still came up short. I took on tutoring jobs, 3 at a time, working until 10 at night. I applied for every assistance program I could find. I called hospitals in 4 states and explained the situation to a dozen different billing departments, and learned a great deal about what the word compassion means in a spreadsheet, which is very little. And I watched my son lie in a rehabilitation bed and practice moving his fingers, just his fingers, with an expression on his face that he was keeping brave for my sake. I could not let him stay in that bed. That was when I met Vincent Hale. It was a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital downtown, one of those quiet, well-dressed evenings in a wood-panelled hall, where the food is good and everyone of angst me. A former student of mine had organised the event and thought I might enjoy it. I had gone mostly because my apartment had started to feel very small. Vincent was standing near the window, away from the crowd, tall, silver-haired, in a dark jacket that fit him the way expensive things fit men who have always had money. He was watching the room the way a person does when they are accustomed to rooms but no longer comfortable in them. When our eyes met, he nodded at me like we already knew each other. We didn't, but we started talking. He was 69. He had built his money in real estate development over 4 decades, the kind of careful long-game work that accumulates quietly and doesn't need to announce itself. His wife had passed 8 years before. He had no children. He had a younger sister named Rowena and a business associate named Alton who managed his estate finances. That night he told me, plainly and without looking for sympathy, that he had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease and that the trajectory his neurologist described was likely to be progressive and significant. He said it the way a person says a fact they have already made their peace with. I respected that. We talked for 2 hours. He listened when I spoke, which is rarer than it should be. He asked about Travis without me having to offer the story first, because somehow it came out naturally. He listened to all of it. He didn't offer pity, he just listened. A week later he called me. And 3 weeks after that he asked me to marry him. I thought he was joking. He was not. He said he did not want to spend whatever time he had left in that large house being managed by people whose interests were not his own. He wanted honest company. He had spoken to his attorney, and there were arrangements he wanted to make, including, if I agreed, a commitment to fund Travis's surgery in full. I sat with that for a long time. I prayed about it. I called my sister in Omaha and we talked until midnight. I asked myself whether I was doing something I could live with, and I gave myself an honest answer instead of a comfortable one. In the end, I said yes. We were married at the courthouse, just Vincent, myself, Travis who came in his wheelchair, and 2 witnesses. No reception, no music, just a quiet promise between 2 people who understood exactly what they were entering. Vincent signed the paperwork for Travis's surgery that same afternoon. Travis went into the operating room 6 weeks later. And I moved into Vincent's house outside of Kearney, a large old property with high ceilings and a fireplace in the living room that Vincent said his late wife had loved. From the first week, something felt off. I could not have named it then. I can name it now. Rowena arrived 2 days after I moved in. She was 55, compact and precise, with perfect posture, and a manner of watching a room that reminded me of a woman taking inventory. She hugged me immediately, called me sister, and smiled with her mouth in a way that didn't quite make it to her eyes. She had been managing Vincent's daily life since his diagnosis: meals, supplements, doctor appointments, all of it run through her like a switchboard. She did it efficiently. She did it with a warmth that always felt slightly rehearsed. Then there was Alton, her ex-husband, which struck me as strange from the beginning. An ex-husband who still held signatory authority on certain estate accounts, who came to the house twice a week like a business partner, who laughed too readily at things that weren't particularly funny, and who had a way of steering conversations away from anything financial before I could ask a question. When he and Rowena were in the same room, they communicated in a shorthand of small glances and brief pauses that said more than the words around them. I noticed all of this, and I filed it away. 38 years in a classroom teaches you to read a room. Vincent and I settled into a quiet rhythm. Breakfast together, reading in the evenings, long talks about his early career and my years teaching. We didn't have a grand romance, but we had something honest, and I had learned by then that honesty is not a small thing. About 6 weeks in, Vincent began declining faster than the doctors had projected. His hands, which had trembled slightly when I met him, now shook through most of the morning. He lost the thread of conversations in ways that felt different from ordinary forgetfulness. More like interference, like something was disrupting his signal. He became confused in the evenings in ways that alarmed me. Rowena always had an explanation. "This is what Parkinson's looks like when it accelerates, Lois. I've researched it extensively. The supplements I've been giving him are actually slowing the progression. Without them, it would be worse." She said that once, very calmly, when I raised my concern after a dinner, where Vincent couldn't remember the name of a street he'd lived on for 30 years. She said it in a tone designed to close a door. I let the door appear closed, but I started watching more carefully. I watched what she added to his tea in the mornings, powder from a small blue container she kept in a cabinet she always locked. I noticed that his worst mornings followed the mornings she had been in the kitchen earliest. I noticed that on the days Rowena was out of town and Alton administered the supplements instead, and Alton, who was lazier about the routine, sometimes skipped them entirely. Vincent's afternoon clarity was noticeably better. I started keeping my own notes. Dates, observations, the kind of record a teacher keeps, because she knows that memory is not the same thing as documentation. And then I found the journal. I had been searching for a book I thought I'd left on the mantel. When I pressed my hand along the brick ledge, one of them shifted. Behind it was a small leather notebook, old and worn. Vincent had hidden it there deliberately, during a window of time when his mind was still clear enough to be afraid of what was happening to it. The entry I found first was dated 7 months earlier, before I was any part of his life. "R is adding something to my morning tea. My hands shake worse after. Ask Kessler. Do not let her see this." There were other entries. In one, he described switching to black coffee on a morning Rowena hadn't been home, and noted that his tremors had eased by noon. In another, he wrote that Alton had pushed him twice in 1 month to sign over expanded financial authority, and that the requests had a practiced quality to them, like lines rehearsed in advance. In the last entry, written 3 weeks before he had called me for the first time, he had written simply, "If something happens to my mind before I can act, I hope the right person finds this." I stood in that living room and breathed. And then I made the decision I believe saved his life. I did not confront Rowena. I did not leave the notebook where I found it. I photographed every single page with my phone, replaced it behind the brick exactly as I had found it, and that same morning I called Mr. Kessler. Vincent had mentioned his attorney to me only once in passing, but the name had stayed with me the way important things do. I found the firm through a simple search. When the receptionist hesitated at my name, I said, "Vincent asked me to call if something happened to his mind before he could act." She put me through immediately. Mr. Kessler listened without interrupting. I told him everything: the supplements, my notes, the dates, the journal photographs I was sending him as we spoke. He told me that Vincent had come to see him 8 months earlier and had established a specific legal instrument. If there was ever credible evidence of intentional interference with his health or his legal capacity, authority over his medical decisions would transfer to an independent medical trustee, and Kessler would be empowered to act without requiring Vincent's current signature. He planned for this, I said. He was a careful man, Kessler said. He just hoped it would never be necessary. Over the next 5 days I moved quietly. I collected a sample of the supplement powder from a small amount that had spilled on the counter and sealed it in a plastic bag. I drove to a private testing lab 2 towns away, not the nearest one, because I didn't know who Rowena might know locally, and paid out of pocket to have it analyzed. I told no one, not even Travis, who was recovering well and whom I did not want to worry until I had something I could actually use. Meanwhile, I kept my face composed at dinner. I asked Rowena about her weekend plans. I listened to Alton talk about property values. I had taught 7th graders for 38 years. I know how to hold an expression while my mind is somewhere else entirely. On the 4th day, the lab called. The supplement contained a compound not found in any legitimate Parkinson's protocol. In repeated doses, it would amplify neurological symptoms and accelerate cognitive decline in patients who already had a neurodegenerative condition. It was not a blunt poison. It was something more calculated, something designed to look exactly like a disease getting worse on its own schedule. I sat in my car in a parking lot and gave myself a few minutes, just a few, then I drove home. That evening I heard Rowena and Alton in the study, voices low through the nearly closed door. I stood in the hall and listened. Rowena said, "The documents have to be signed before his window closes completely. We are running out of time." Alton replied, "He keeps saying he wants to think about it. He's still more present than he should be." Rowena's voice dropped to something quieter and harder. "Not for much longer." I walked to the kitchen and stood at the sink with the water running so my hands had something to do. Then I went upstairs and sat beside Vincent, who was half asleep, and held his hand until his breathing steadied. "I'm going to handle this," I whispered. He couldn't hear me, but I needed to say it out loud. The next morning I called Kessler with the lab results. 2 hours later he arrived at the house with a court order and a medical supervisor appointed by a judge through an emergency petition Kessler had filed the evening before. Rowena answered the door because she was closer. When she opened it and found Kessler and 2 people she did not recognize, her face went very still. Kessler introduced himself without drama. He explained that effective immediately, per a legal instrument signed by Vincent Hale and now executed by court order, all medical management decisions were suspended pending formal review. He handed her the document. Rowena looked at me over his shoulder. I met her eyes and did not look away. "You did this," she said. "Vincent did this," I answered, 8 months ago. The police arrived within the hour. When investigators tested what remained in the blue container from Rowena's locked cabinet, it matched the lab results exactly. When they sat with her in the living room and asked her to explain it, she held herself together for about 4 minutes. Then her composure came apart the way things do when they've been held too rigidly for too long. She said she had not intended to kill him. She had only needed him unable to sign the restructuring documents, papers that would have redirected the majority of the estate into a medical research foundation and removed Alton from his financial management role entirely. Once Vincent's legal capacity was formally diminished, she and Alton would have been appointed trustees. Everything would have continued as it had been, as she had counted on it being. She said Vincent had promised her, years ago, that she would always be taken care of, and when he told her, he planned to change everything, to leave most of it to charity, to a woman he had known for a matter of weeks. She felt the ground disappear beneath her. I understood, sitting in that room, that this was not only about money. It was about a woman who had confused her brother's generosity for a permanent structure, who had built her entire sense of security on something that was never hers to claim. That understanding did not make what she had done forgivable, but I understood it. Rowena was charged with criminal administration of a harmful substance and conspiracy. Alton was charged as an accomplice. They were taken out of that house on a Tuesday morning in October, and the house, which had felt watched and heavy since the day I arrived, felt different by afternoon. Vincent's recovery was gradual, but it was real. Without the compound accumulating in his system, his neurological function stabilized. The Parkinson's diagnosis was genuine. That was never a fiction, but the severity, the rapid confusion, the violence of his morning tremors, those had been manufactured. His actual condition was manageable. The doctors told him what had been done to him, and he received that information, the way he received most things, with a quietness that I had come to understand was not passivity, but a kind of deep and deliberate calm. He held my hand through the whole conversation. Afterward he was quiet for a long time, then he looked at me and said, "You found the notebook." "I did," I said. I wasn't sure anyone would. "I was looking for a book," I told him. "Wrong kind of luck." He smiled. It was the first time I had seen him smile in weeks, and it looked like him again, fully like him, and I held on to that. 3 months later, Travis walked into the room on his own. He had a cane and he moved carefully, and his physical therapist stood just behind him. But he walked. He crossed that room and sat down in the chair across from me and said, "Mum, please don't cry in front of my physical therapist." So I waited until I was in the hallway. Vincent has established his foundation, a medical research institute focused on neurological conditions, designed to fund treatment for families who cannot pay. It is what he always intended. It is a legacy that actually means something, which is rarer than it should be. Alton's authority over the estate has been revoked entirely. A professional firm manages it now with complete transparency. Rowena and Alton face what the law determines they deserve, and that is no longer my responsibility to carry. I tutor high school students on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons in the dining room with the good light. Vincent sometimes sits in the armchair nearby and reads while I work. He says he finds it comforting, the sound of a student working something out. I believe him, because it is the same thing I have always found comforting about it. Some evenings we sit on the back porch and watch the light change over the fields, and he asks me whether I have any regrets. I always give him the same answer. I said yes to save my son. I would make that decision 1,000 times without hesitation. But somewhere between a quiet courthouse ceremony and the morning, I stood in a cold living room, holding a leather notebook with shaking hands. I stopped doing any of this for survival alone. I started doing it because this man, this careful, gentle man who had hidden a journal behind a fireplace brick because he was afraid and still wanted to be believed, had become someone I love. I was not looking for that. I don't think either of us was. But sometimes the right thing and the unexpected thing arrive together. And the only question that matters is whether you are brave enough to hold on to both. If this story means something to you, leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done in my place. And subscribe, because there are more stories coming, and every one of them is about ordinary people who chose not to stay quiet when it mattered most. Being 62 does not make you invisible, it makes you experienced. And experience, when you finally decide to use it, is a formidable thing.